Gentlemen, good evening and welcome. Contrary to giving the 5 minutes leeway that we do to our audiences, since we are online as well, we are starting on time because people have already joined. So, welcome and thank you all. We had our misgivings that the Delhi heat would keep most people out and they would join online. But thank you so much for being here for the launch of our new book club. We've had a book club before, but this is the first time that we are doing a hybrid book club, and we're hoping that that is going to be a successful venture. We found a very suitable partnership in a suitable agency. We are delighted to have them as collaborators on that. And I hope that we are going to be able to see you back here for our monthly book club launches. I will tell you about the next book at the end of this. It is our pleasure to have Nilanjana as our first author and Jai, who's going to be in conversation with them. But before we get, please will you join us out here? And may I request the director IHC, Mr. Sunit Tandon, to come and say a few words.
Thank you very much indeed, Vidyun. And it'll be just really, literally, a very few words indeed, because I just want to say how happy I am that this has finally taken off. When Vidyun first said that she was keen to revive the book club, I said, I've seen these things come and go, they don't survive. And she said, no, we're going to do it as a hybrid book club and we're going to bring in collaborators. And Suitable Agency came on. Thank you very much indeed for doing so. And now in this new format, given the amount of interest we've had online also, and you can see people are joining in from all over the world for this book club, I think perhaps it does have a future. It looks very hopeful indeed in the first edition. I do hope it lasts and it becomes a regular monthly event that all book lovers look forward to. So I just want to wish it all the very best, because sometimes when you do initiatives, when you undertake them, they don't often work out because of lack of response. Tonight, I can say that the lack of response aspect is certainly not worrying me at all. So thank you very much indeed. A Suitable Agency, Nilanjana, and also Jai. Of course, we've seen you after a long time. Thank you for being part of this wonderful book club. Thank you, all of you who are taking part.
Thank you, Sunil, for doing this. It's all done by them.
Right now, can I please request you, Shivendra, to come and take over and introduce our author, our person in conversation, and then we can carry on with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidyun. Good evening. I'm Shiven from a Suitable Agency. Welcome to the inaugural session of Suitably Booked, the new book club by India Habitat Center in collaboration with a Suitable Agency. Just to begin this evening, there's a wonderful moment in Saul Bellows' novel, The Dean's December, where the central character, the Dean, Cod, hears a dog barking wildly somewhere. And the central character imagines about what the dog is trying to say. And since it's a dog in a Bellow novel, we also need to know what is it saying and why not. The character imagines that the barking is the dog's protest against the limited dog experience. For God's sake, the dog is trying to say, let's open the universe a little more. And I think Bello is not really talking about dogs, or not only about dogs, but also about all of us who love to read, write, tell, and hear stories. For that is what books and stories do. They open the universe a little more. And one of the best ways to celebrate that is by gathering together an engaging group of readers like you and starting a book club. Or in the beautiful words of Nilanjana Roy, as she remarked in setting up this event, you don't read alone. You live alongside the characters. You share what you read with friends. You read in companionship with the author. I love the idea of starting a book club to bring together a reading community. End of quote. We thank all of you for the fantastic response to our new initiative and for coming tonight. And thanks also to those of you who have joined online. Our book in focus this month has been Nilanjana Roy's genre-defying novel, Black River. Nilanjana is the author of 3 novels, including Black River, and has edited 3 anthologies. She is also a columnist for the Financial Times and writes on books and reading. This evening, she will be in conversation with Jai Arjun Singh. Jai is a writer and critic and has written for a host of influential publications. He's also the author of 2 acclaimed books on cinema and is an editor of an anthology. Their chat will be followed by a Q&A session with the readers. A request for people who have joined online on Zoom to be ready with their questions and type it in the chat box once the conversation between Nilanjana and Jai is over. We'd like to thank our wonderful partners at India Habitat Center, especially Vidyun, Renu, and Shadab. And big thanks to Nilanjana and Jai for coming together to discuss Black River with the members of Suitably Booked. We are delighted and we can't wait to get started. So Jai, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Shivendra. Is this okay? Is the sound okay? Just let us know if there's a problem. Um, Thanks. And just to add to what Vidyun and Suneet said, many congrats on setting up this initiative, and I'm sure it'll lead to some very good conversations in the months ahead, starting with today. Just a couple of points. This being the first edition of Suitably Booked, we just figuring out the format. Ideally, for a book club discussion, we'd assume that everybody here has already read the book, and it'll be possible to just get into very spoilerish conversations about a crime novel. But that's something we won't be doing here. We'll be Nilanjana, and I think we'll just tiptoe around some of the stuff that's directly connected to the mystery in the book. And Shivendra, I'm sure, will let us know when we have to open the conversation up and bring you into this. I'm sure some of you, especially those of you who have read the book, will have your own questions and observations. And we have the Zoom audience as well. I also just wanted to very, very quickly say before getting to the book, it's a real pleasure to be doing this, particularly because Nilanjana and I have known each other for 20 years now. We were part of the initial
Blogging cabal. Yeah.
the blogging cabal, to make it sound more important than it felt at the time. and she was a big inspiration to me when I was getting into the world of literary criticism, literary journalism. One of my happiest moments as a young journalist was the discovery that Nilanjana Roy, who wrote this wonderful column called Speaking Volumes for Business Standard, was the same person as Hari Babu, who ran an excellent blog called Kitab Khana. And, so then it's hard as it is to believe 2004, exactly 20 years. This is also a way of saying that my standards, the bar that I have for her writing has always been very high. The expectations have been very high. So it was a great pleasure and a great relief when her first novel came out in 2012, The Wildings, to see how good it was and that it was everything that one would have expected from her. That is also true of this book that we are discussing here today, though there are fewer cats in this book. It's more human-centered. Those of you who have read it will already know that this is a book that operates at many levels. It is a crime novel, it's a murder mystery, a police procedural, and I think it's probably possible to enjoy it purely at that level. If you don't want to get into very deep themes or subject matter, that's one of the first signs of its success as a novel. But of course, and for those of you who don't know, the basic story is it's set in a village called Titarpur, around an hour and a half, 2 hours from Delhi. where in the opening couple of chapters, an 8-year-old girl is killed. And then following this, we follow the other characters, including her bereaved father, Chand, and the village policeman, especially Ombir Singh, and others. But what also happens over the course of the book, as you continue reading it, you realize it's really about two Indias and possibly other Indias in between as well. It's about the many fault lines in Indian society, the many things that can impede a murder investigation, for instance. And on that note, I just wanted to bring Nilanjana in and ask a couple of questions that are related. One, how did this book come together in your head? And I know you are an avid reader of crime fiction, so and I know the genre presumably means quite a bit to you. But as a writer, did you find that doing it this way, as a murder mystery, as a procedural, liberated you in some ways to deal with certain things that perhaps might have become pedantic if you had done it in a different way?
Thanks for that generous introduction. And before we start, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has braved the heat to come out here, and to the Zoom people. We love you, Zoom people, even if we can't see you right now. And I wanted to say thank you to a Suitable agency, to the Habitat Center for being so warm with their hospitality. And the answer to your question, Jay, is that as ever with books, just a second, could we cut the echo a little bit? I think there's a small echo on the sound system, which may be bothering the audience. For those mics? Yeah, I just. So long as we haven't cut the Zoom feed. Excellent. Okay. The truth is, I didn't really know what I was doing with Black River. I didn't start to think of it as crime. If I had, I wouldn't have written the book, because to me, crime fiction, like science fiction and fantasy, requires a high level of technical skill. And if you've grown up reading everyone from P.D. James to Agatha Christie, the classics basically, you know that starting out you have to measure yourself against the best, and there you will fall short. But I kind of backed into it. I was taking notes when I was a gender reporter with the New York Times. And that work took me a lot to Haryana, to Uttar Pradesh, to parts of Delhi that I would perhaps not normally have visited. And I spent a lot of my time walking around and occasionally being thrown out of police stations because we had reached the magic hour of 5 p.m. in the evening, and they were scandalized at the thought that a woman might hang around after that. I started to see not just one story, but a multitude of stories, and Delhi came into sight, Delhi and the borders of it, that I really wanted to write about. I procrastinated for several years because I didn't think I had the right to write about that. But it was too compelling. I got to know migrants, for example, like Chand, Rabia, and Khalid, who make friends and who live on the banks of the Yamuna. And, all of them have come to Delhi in search of a dream and found tremendous discomfort, tremendous aggression, but also something that maybe they couldn't find back home, maybe a space where they could be, despite all the roughness of the city, a little more themselves. I think the second part of it was, after listening to the police and after seeing maybe one body too many, I think I was carrying a burning anger about the casual way in which lives in this country in general, there was just an entire category of disposable lives. And I'll keep the gore quotient down because we have some younger readers with us. But I think I was deeply distressed at going, from small towns to villages to the city, and seeing how casually women and young girls disappeared off the map, sometimes mourned, but mostly unmourned, and how seldom justice was actually delivered, how elusive it was, how difficult it was for both the police and the family. And I think, the question that drove Black River for me was really, in this situation where everything is messed up, you don't have proper forensics in a village like Titarpur. You might be literally an hour away from the city, but you don't have the same facilities, the same access.
And the question that began to take shape was, what does justice look like? To people on an everyday basis, you suffer a tremendous loss, the media descends like flies. But in the long term, if the system can't deliver, then what happens? Do you take it into your own hands? Does the village come together with the police, with every incentive to look away? I think I was surprised. This was back in 2016, 17. I was surprised at the number like Ombi who found themselves, pursuing a kind of reluctant goodness, a goodness that they didn't choose, but that had been kind of forced on them. I don't know whether this answers your question, but I'll stop now.
Well, it does. There's a lot more, of course, as you said, and the fault lines that I was talking about earlier. You have, for instance, in addition to what you said about the forensics, you might have there's just one throwaway passage. It just takes up a few lines, but it reveals so much about this milieu, where where it's pointed out that qualified doctors don't conduct many of the autopsies themselves because of the caste issue. Because they don't want to be touching just about any dead body, and as a result of that, you have unqualified assistants doing it instead, and that of course creates its own set of problems in terms of being able to deal with a crime effectively. I also wanted to come to also what you said about and I mentioned Delhi and the village of Titarpur, as if those are the only spaces. But of course, in the book, particularly in one section, which I'll just come to because I found it structurally very interesting, a flashback section where Nilanjana actually does something that's quite a brave thing and eventually a very effective thing for a crime writer to do. Around 60 pages into the book, you have the investigation that's underway, and you think at this point you just sort of you want to stick with that, but then you flash back to a few decades earlier, actually,
Probably in the 90s.
1980s, where Chand, to a pre-Munia world. Munia is the little girl who's murdered, and her father, when he's a teenager, he goes to Delhi for the first time. There are these very evocative descriptions of him seeing the highway for the first time. A new world has opened up. It's unimaginable.
He has his
And-
dreams, you see?
Yeah. And the friends that he makes, the friendships that he forms, maybe a bit reluctantly at first, the things that happen, and you just take us there into this other world before bringing us back to the investigation. I thought that was a very brave thing to do structurally for a crime novel, but it gives us a lot of background into this man. It provides a lot of context for his current life, which I thought was very interesting. Was there a point, just to continue with the earlier question asked, was there a point when you considered writing this not as a mystery but as something else? I was thinking about that because of the Yamuna section.
I think once I realized, Black River had a lot of early failed drafts, and I'm a great believer in the fact that you should just write the terrible drafts out of your system. I mean, I think I started off with a very earnest character who we threw out about 180 pages of that because the character was basically a vehicle for my editorial opinions on the state of the country and had no life to her whatsoever. And once we got rid of that, I don't think there was a point of time at which I considered, once I discovered that there was a mystery and an investigation at the heart of Black River, I didn't back away from it for a second because the way I see crime fiction, and because you read so much in the way of Indian pulp fiction in Hindi and Bengali or Scandinavian fiction, that this is an intimidating form, but it's also a very forgiving form. And two things that crime writers before me had done beautifully is used crime fiction to tell the story of a city changing, which is partly what I was recording over the years in Delhi, a period of time where the Yamuna is still a golden river and people go there for picnics and it's got a beauty to it. To the point where, when Chand goes back with Rabia to revisit it well into closer to our time, it's become this sludgy, overtaken piece of real estate waiting to be developed pretty much. I did want to do that, but the other side of it, I knew I was taking a risk. And I didn't think about it when I was writing because I just wanted people to know where Chand was coming from. I didn't want him to be just a grieving father. As it is, because this book is in English, I think one of my few regrets is that a lot of Chands will not read Black River as it stands, but it's written for them, and I did want people to get to know the kind of man he was, very tied to the soil, very clear that, okay, he comes from a farming background. He doesn't want to get rid of that. But at the same time, he's got this burning, desire to go out and see the world, and he knows it's big. When he comes to Delhi, he really plans to go and see the Himalayas and the country and do a dunya dekho kind of thing. But something about this city catches at his heart. And as I write, I'm just going to go with that and hope for that a position of mutual trust opens up with the reader, and that they'll wait and follow me, back into the past and then come back. Because when you do come back to 2017, the monsoons, the summer, the monsoons, when that investigation's going on, then it makes sense. Otherwise, it's just mechanical. Otherwise, it's just a police procedure.
Yeah.
And I have nothing against that. But I've always seen crime as a capricious genre and as a smuggler genre.
Yeah.
So the other thing that you can smuggle into it is political critique to a certain extent, or a kind of, not even critique, but a running diary of the tensions that come into a city where people have learned to live, side by side. And then when the politics change, you're suddenly told that because you're this religion or because you're that kind of person, you can't have a relationship. There's nowhere to meet. There's nowhere to be with your friends. And every time I tried to do that in literary fiction, I failed miserably because I just ended up sounding very pompous. Whereas when I let my characters live through it, they had things to say and they saw the situation very differently than all my well-meant editorializing would have left me. I think, one of the pleasures of Black River for me was this slow, understanding of the characters. Chand and Rabia might come from a similar-ish background, but they think very differently. Rabia's attitude to life is basically never surrender. She doesn't see herself as a victim even when she's victimized. Khalid, on the other hand, her husband, and they're both migrants from the Bihar Bengal side. He's very fragile. He's one of those gentle children you come across, and sometimes I worried often that the city was too much for him. But by and large, a gift of writing, the characters at some point come and tell you what they should be and what you should be looking at. And sometimes you just have to pivot 180 degrees and look in that direction. And Chand was very clear he wanted his story told.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, well, I can, there's absolutely nothing pompous or ponderous about the way in which you deal with those big issues. I felt that all of it was very organic to the mystery and to the, and in the service of the narrative. One other thing that flashback section did for me as a reader, and I'm sure some of you will agree as well, is that it provides a breather. You've had these first 50, 60 pages where something horrible has happened, a grieving father, etc. And then it's like the book draws back for a while and gives the reader, a break from that, takes us to another time. Even though bad things happen in that time also to Chand and Rabia and the Badshah Mia, their friend. But it does help. It just sort of in terms of pace and tone, it helps a great deal. There's also a wonderful character who is there for only a few pages, but I have to ask if this was based on some of the Tinsel King of the Yamuna.
I got this amazing character who's the madman of the waters, literally. I met so many people when I was just walking around the city, and at some point, did I tell you about the time when I first saw the Yamuna properly? Until then I'd lived in the city for years, gone to college out here, despite being a Calcuttan. And in Calcutta, the Hooghly is very much part of your experience. In Delhi, you kind of turn your back on the Yamuna and, that's it. You know that it's polluted, you know that there's flamingos and birds near the Okla Bird Sanctuary, and that's about it. You don't have a relationship with it. So one of these days, I was crossing the Noida D&D bridge, and I just looked out of the car window and I saw something. I was in a taxi and I asked the cab driver to just go off. I got off and slipped under the railing. and went down. And within about 5 minutes, this noise, the rush of the highway had just fallen away. And I found myself, facing towards these fishermen's huts and these little boats. And walking through rushes, I came across a startled camel and his rider. And I went a little further and stumbling a bit because it's quite thick jharis and stuff. And then you see the clayey banks, and then ahead of you, this world opens up, silvery water, and there's little islands, and each island has a different character. Further down, around the next bend, you have the marigold farmers who've been there for generations, pretty much, who've seen Delhi change. Around a second loop is where you have the drunkards and the gamblers hanging out, along with a pujari, who runs a temple, and he's a reformed gangster, and he very reformed. And he actually became a good friend and a kind of guide. And the women will pass you from hand to hand. I walked along a huge stretch of the river and down the other side, which doesn't come into the book, Najafgarh side, more or less passed from hand to hand by women who said, this is safe, this is not safe. You can walk here up till 3 p.m. But, don't come back after 6 p.m. because that's when there's a border dispute and criminals from both sides dispose of the evidence of their crimes and bodies in the waters at a certain place, because then there's a question of, whose jurisdiction it becomes. And in the dispute, it's very likely that they will get off scot-free. So, everywhere you went, there was this entire landscape. It was beautiful beyond belief in those days. And then you start to meet people and talk to them. And in the center of that, the Tinsel King was a bit of a composite. There was an extremely dangerous madman who used to come leaping out literally with a sword at one stretch of the river, threatening to cut people into pieces, and he'd actually swing at people and injure them. So he wasn't kidding about this. And there was another very spaced out gentleman who I suspect, spent most of his days sitting there with ganja. And he had just accumulated things like a bowerbird, So he'd taken cassette spools and made that into a hat for himself. And, there was so much creativity in that. And I felt I had to preserve something of it. I hope they don't mind my borrowing their feathers.
And of course, coming back to the village, Titarpur, I was really quite taken by the main village policeman, Ombir Singh, as a character, because he's along with Chand. I think we during the course of the investigation, we probably spend the most time with him, and there's something pretty interesting about him, in the sense that he has all the reason in the world to be cynical, because he's at the mercy of more powerful forces that he can't even begin to understand. He just has to do things. I think that bit about there being no justice comes from one of his lines. It's something that he says in the book at one point, or he thinks, or something like that. And yet there is also a moral compass somewhere that you sense, that that he will do what is right by Chand. That's a sense that one gets, that even though he is this bitter character. Did you, the research that you did it involve speaking to people like this at some length?
I got to know a lot of policemen. That was more the gender work to some extent. And so long as people feel they can trust you, I think they do start to open up about their stories. And there were two sides to it. You've seen that the police forces in Delhi and Uttar Pradesh have become more brutal. I believe that your police forces anyway are a pretty accurate reflection of where your polity is going. When they are doing their job, when they are upholding law and order, then you know that the country is going in a particular direction. And when they're at their most, swinging the lathis and ignoring the rules on torture, also where that comes from. They're a very good reflection of us. But I also met, Umbir is not based again on any single policeman, and that's not because of a private ethical. A lot of writers might disagree, but I wouldn't be able to base any character on somebody who's full on real, because that would feel a little bit like theft. But often I think I walked in bristling a bit about policemen, and with some justice, because they don't want to register crimes that are inconvenient for them. The first reaction to women reporting, sexual violence or worse is almost always, what did you do to bring this about? And a lot of reporting of crimes depends on what caste you are, how powerful you are. So I went in, with certain prejudices coming in from the activist journalist side. And then I discovered that the conditions that they live in are often miserable. It's a highly corrupted service, you know, and at the same time, in almost every district that I wandered through, I met a surprising number of policemen like Ombi who almost in spite of themselves, something atavistic, like a vestigial tale. There's this idea that justice must sometimes at least prevail. And you meet men who have softer hearts but don't know how to express that softness because nothing in their service and nothing in their own family backgrounds gives them the language or the vocabulary to do that. So there's both the unabashed corruption. You take it as perfectly normal that the top businessman in the area will give you a packet of something every month, from which your household will actually run. But at the same time, you're seeing the worst of human nature every single day. And you are perpetually, Ombi's big problem in life is that his feet hurt and his stomach, every now and then, given the poor diet, goes out of order and the paperwork is too much. And in the middle of that, no matter how much he wants to look away, for him and Bhimsen, who's his, comrade in arms, I think they have soft spots. And when they see children suffering or when they see something that is an open and outright injustice, even when it's inconvenient for them, I don't think they're being noble at all. I just think they cannot help themselves. The part of them that put on the Vardi is still there. The part of them that took those policemen's oaths is still there under the rest of it. You see?
In a way that actually answers the next thing the next talking point that I was just going to bring up, which I had briefly touched on when we spoke recently. One thing that I find really interesting about this book, and this is quite a thing I think to say about a book that begins with the murder of an 8-year-old child, and then then gives us her grieving father, whose world has been completely shattered and so on. But there's something about this book, and I was telling Nilanjana this few days back. There is a hopefulness about it. There's a sense of affirmation somewhere, and it's not something glib or dewy-eyed, along the lines of, oh, everything will be okay, justice will be served. It's something a little more mature than that. It's you don't lose sight of the darkness, but I think what I'm saying is that I can think of many other crime novels, probably some that I've read, that have similar plots or similar arcs, which are much more nihilistic in tone, much bleaker in tone. Whereas what you offer is this sense of hope and the sense of grace, which comes across in a very unforced way. And I think what you said just now about the Ombir character, and maybe he just has something in him that naturally gravitates towards wanting to see justice done, despite all the darkness that he's seen. I think maybe
it's inconvenient for him. It's something that he rather wishes he didn't have. But at the same time, the way Bhimsen says it, some things are just wrong.
Yeah.
And then if the law doesn't give you a way to fix it, then maybe you do the old-fashioned masculine thing and fix it with your fists, and somewhere inside that that's wrong. But how else do you set right something?
Yeah.
And that desire it's not a desire for goodness. And I think it's troublesome rather than an asset to many people in the justice system, but it's there.
Yeah.
You're asking, I'm so grateful that you think that it has some tenderness or some hope, I think the first couple of years that you immerse yourself in any kind of work that involves the police or violence or crime or whatever, the first 2 years you're living in despair, actually. I think you start to see that the world is an extremely violent place. You see the callousness and the cruelty of people on a day-to-day basis, and that can make people very bitter. But the next few years, when you stick to it, whatever hope there is in the book comes from people. And I'm not saying that in a trivial way. I'm just saying that time and time again, when I went out thinking that what I would find was, people who were shattered or who had been turned hard by life. Yes, I met those people. But I also met people who had more courage than I would have been capable of in the same circumstances. If you've seen 4 of your I mean, if you've seen part of your family disappear in the most cruel way, and you know there's no hope for justice because the perpetrator is powerful and protected, and you still turn into somebody who then spends the next decade of their lives helping families who have gone through similar grief negotiate the police station. And you're out in Haryana, and the papers will never write about you. There'll be no medal pinned on your chest. But you take something that is the worst nightmare any parent can imagine, and you turn it into kindness and compassion. There was a resilience I saw, and I remember, we talk about the 2012 protests in Delhi, if you remember, against, again, I don't want to name it because we have younger people here, but this was the Nirbhaya protests. Before that, for 2 years before that, I had been wandering around Haryana a bit, and where we were seeing the same phenomenon as women moved out into the wider world, seeking college degrees, seeking jobs, seeking all of that. They were met with a wave of violence that was, even for a country that has violence, it was pretty unprecedented. And unfortunately, it worked. 8 years later, the numbers had reversed and women had gone, so to speak, back home. And that's just a wave in the cycle. In another 10 years again, the numbers will be pushing back again. I went for a protest in Jind after a crime that still gives me nightmares. It involved a young girl who was murdered on her way back from a college examination in a most brutal way. And people had gathered to try and give her family a little bit of strength. And I thought it was going to be, what the Delhi protests are, very solemn, very grim, everybody speaking as if at a condolence meeting with their voices lowered. And the women came out with drums and, with buttons banging on them and singing. And I was taken aback, and they said, "What, you don't know any good songs?" I said, "No, I know a couple, maybe one or two, but we're singing at this kind of meeting." And they said, "Well, there's the darkness and the loss, and that's all very terrible. But you want to reach happiness, you want to reach justice, don't you? So that's how you make it happen. You sing it into being." It was just such a powerful moment because it was very matter of fact, somebody explaining something that was very obvious to her at that point. Or as with, Radha, she comes up against the wrong end of the politics of the day, and she finds herself under increasing pressure. Her neighborhood, which, where people used to mingle for years, becomes more segregated. It's a kind of respectable slum, of which there are many in Delhi, on the outskirts of the city, and has a well-settled feel to it. And, suddenly at night, the women start to go in earlier. They don't go out and sit in the Maidan anymore. There are groups of young boys riding up and down on bikes and throwing acid-filled bottles. They're harassing people, harassing their pets, preventing them from having weddings. And the whole mahal is basically, you don't belong here, you need to go. But the number of families I saw who just dealt with that, not by coming out into a protest, which is a great way to register your resistance, but not the only way, or not by going on TV, or not by, not by being active in the sense that we consider. There was a kind of make shuffle, and maybe we'll move out into this colony for a while, but we'll come back because we belong here. And just, that simple act of saying we refuse to believe that we don't belong. We claim our place here, even if we have to bow a little bit, but we'll stay. Yeah. When you see that, it's powerful. When you see people, I mentioned Chand, Rabia, and Khalid, and Delhi is extraordinary, despite the very segregated colonies that we live in. I think like any megacity, any huge metropolis, it also provides the opportunity for you to cross all kinds of boundaries, from caste to gender. You're pushed up to religion, you're pushed up against each other. And Chand and Rabia, who have a very close friendship. Rabia and Khalid come from a village out of the Bengal, Bihar border. Chand comes from the outskirts of Delhi. They would never have met otherwise, When you see that room, that you see against the admitted and ever-present cruelty of the world, the violence that people can do. Sometimes they can do the worst things so casually, just because somebody is in the way. But set against that, there is a very, very real compassion as well. And I felt that it would be wrong to leave that out of the book. When you've seen it, when you've experienced that kindness, that resilience, that caring, the very quiet undercurrent of courage that is not like the courage we know,
Yeah.
then it finds its way into the book.
Yeah, that just, this is also where I wish we could get into spoilerish terrain, but I was thinking of the last 3 or 4 chapters
Yeah,
of the
which we
book.
can't talk about, Jay.
We'll keep it as abstract as one possibly can. But I was just thinking about the way in which the tone changes from darkness to one of grace in the last
That was just me having fun.
in the last 2 or 3
Yeah.
chapters. Those of you who are about to read it will see for yourself. But basically, I just loved. I told you this before. I loved the climactic passage, which I'm not going to
Thank you.
give too much away. But suffice it to say that it's set at a celebratory, it's a function, and this is where you find out, the grand reveal happens. It involves a lot of flopping fish. That's all I can say. And after that, you have the penultimate chapter, which is also very dark, and it's exactly as you would want this sort of a crime novel to move towards. And then at the very end, you have that chapter of grace where it's just Chand again. And I thought that was really, really well done, and it fits completely with what you've been saying about those apparently contradictory tones where you're dealing with something horrible, but there are ways and ways of dealing with it. And I think that that's something I hope those of you who haven't read the book will get a chance to find out. I also wanted to say the people who have joined us on Zoom, if they have questions, maybe they should just put it on chat, right? Rather, because otherwise we'll end up with this. We'll have to.
We can access that here, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we can access
yeah.
the chat here.
Huh.
But meanwhile, I'd also like to open it up to the actual physical audience present here. Are there questions for Nilanjana? Again, keeping in mind those of you who have read the book, if you have talking points or observations, just avoid spoilers if that's possible, or avoid saying something that's too specific to the mystery. But if we have questions, yeah, can we have the mic there?
First of all, heartiest congratulations for your book.
Thank you.
Just a query. You have mentioned that the book will not be read by many of the Chand because it's in English. Have you ever thought of translating it into Hindi?
I don't think my Hindi is strong enough for me to do that myself, but we have. It's a little early to say anything. There's
Thank
been some interest from Hindi publishing houses,
Sure.
and I'm hoping that that'll work out soon.
Sure.
You know?
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from me. Yeah.
Good evening, Nilanjana. Yes, it was just very mesmerizing to hear you talk. Your voice and the way you speak is just melodious. It's like music, and you look like sunflower today. So my question, I am also very, very sensitive to the darker side of this world that exists, and I somehow, I just want to stay in delusion and avoid all of the things. But I also find myself sometimes in those dark place myself. My question, what aspects or areas of your psyche were really triggered when you were in the process of living the words that you have written in the book? And also, were you able to come out with something like, what do you think? How can we really enter into somebody else's psyche or consciousness? How can we really bring a change at that level? Could you like really think or arrive at any such like, do you think we can change the consciousness of the people who are all in those dark situations? I mean, I cannot frame the question.
No, that's fine. I completely get what you're saying. I think it worked on me. If you're talking about emotions, if you're talking about the emotional journey, something like that. what it did was it was very cathartic in many ways. You know, there was a lightness that started to enter. You can write from anger, you can write from grief, and at some point, you know, the more that you write from there, the you disappears, and you become basically just a channel for the characters to come through. Okay. So that process is actually what I love about writing. It's surprisingly egoless once you've gone through the work of getting to know your characters and where they are from. And instead of being just sitting back and being miserable about, you know, human cruelty or inhumanity or changing times, there's something about setting it down as a writer that allows you to process it better, maybe. Process is such a boring word. I don't like the word process. It's like processed cheese. I'm sorry about that, riff. You know, but the second part of it, you're asking about whether we can change the consciousness. I'm not clear whether you meant characters here or ordinary people, everyone like us, readers. Hmm. I think mostly I listened. I didn't seek to change because I was aware that, you know, coming from the kind of privilege and background that I come from, it would probably not have been welcome if I'd suggested changes to people's lives. Sometimes you see things that are a little jarring. You know, women will come up and ask you the most personal questions. And what they really want to know is A, why do you have so much freedom? And, you know, where is your husband or other appointed caretaker? And two, if you have so much freedom, then why are you such a fool that this is what you're doing with it? You know, walking around a city and talking to all of us. And, you know, there's a lot of disapproval out there. Okay, fine. It's only when you say you're a writer that's that part of it sorts out, because then they shout to each other, Acha, you know, she's a writer. That's why she's a little. And everything falls back into its appointed order. I didn't seek to change the people I met, but believe me, they changed me. You know, I think one of the things that just surprises me about India is that everywhere you walk, everywhere you go, yes, there is a risk being a woman walking on her own. You know, that's acknowledged. There's a safety issue from time to time. But by and large, this is an extremely generous country. And people are generous once they take you to themselves and they decide that you are one of their own. They will do everything from feed you to give you the story of their lives, to go 10 miles out of their way if you need to reach a certain place. You know, so seeing that, I think, was a little bit of a hedge against the visible cruelty. I think there are some places where I'm not fearless enough, or at least with this novel, I wasn't fearless enough to go. There's a certain kind of violence, cruelty, murder that I can't deal with, you know. I understand the crime of impulse, I even understand the crime of passion, but a cold-blooded, this person has stepped across a line and so we are going to kill them and erase them from the world, and we think we've done the right thing. I never fully understood that, and I think that's where I fall short as a writer. You're coming to the question about whether reading changes anything. You know, one of the things I love about having this book club initiative is that reading changes things enough when you're on your own. You know, because whatever I have written, you're going to come to the book with your own framework and you're going to make it anew in a way that maybe even you don't make a film or a piece of art anew, right? But readers also change each other. The simplest way to see this is WhatsApp, you know, which is a very crude form, but a very powerful form of storytelling, actually can inflame people's brains and turn them into, you know, raving lunatics on political subjects. And so you learn a lesson out there, you know, crude storytelling is also very powerful. But I think we changed both by the stories on the page and the stories that we receive in everyday life, or as a writer when you're listening to people. And I think it's more a question of how open you are to being changed. You see? And once you're open enough, I think there's reading a book by and large is still a lot of lofty claims are made for reading literature, which I want you to completely ignore. You know, it's not going to make you a better person or a kinder person or better informed necessarily. But the one thing it does is it switches empathy. Instead of looking at the world from just your perspective, you're suddenly looking at it from completely different perspectives. Sometimes a cat, you know, sometimes a criminal, whatever. And if you do that enough times, you stop thinking that your view of the world is the only view there is. That was a long answer, but I hope that helps. Thanks.
We have a couple of questions on Zoom, which we should just get to. And I think Pratima has a question. She's been unmuted, right? So if you want to ask the question, we need to test the audio. If it doesn't work, then we'll just read it out.
Yeah.
Pratima?
Oh, there's a lot of questions. Okay.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
I'm Pratima Goel.
Hi,
I wanted
Pratima.
to know, we know these crimes and these things happening in many cities all over the world. So what specifically made you pick up this one? What kind of triggered this particular book? Because we all know of this case, it was there in all the media and horrifying. But and the way that you have written it, it really brought it to life. It sent goose pimples with the details and everything. And their grief, you could feel it almost. But I want to know what inspired you to get into this particular story.
Okay, I thought we talked about that a little bit. Thanks anyway. It was a completely fictional crime. I came across a lot of similar crimes, definitely, particularly the disappearance of young children, the killings of young girls. And I think I didn't want to write about any of them in a true life way, though there are people like Sonia Pomero and others who have done that brilliantly. I recommend Good Girls. I didn't want to do that because I think for me, I lack the certain something as a journalist that would allow me to spend that kind of time with a real family. Whereas it's easier for me to imagine a crime. And I think, why did I write about this one? It wasn't the crime itself. It wasn't it was partly that sadness that you're carrying, the grief, about what you see as almost the erasure of so many women's lives, the lives they don't get to lead, the fact that they don't get to grow up. That hit me very hard. But more to the fact, I think I've always been curious about power, how you exercise it. And sometimes the most power you can have is the power over somebody else's life. And sometimes you can take that, with immense cruelty or with immense, you just want something out of your way. And I found that fascinating. And
So is it all fictional, or you did a lot of research on what actually happened with Chand and
you're asking about the line between fiction and research?
yes.
Okay. The book's completely fictional. There isn't a single character in the book from, Balshamli to Chandra,
Oh, I see.
Sen. They're not based on real people. But I think I did need to actually speak to a certain number of real people from that world and spend a lot of time hanging around the edges of villages like Pitapur. So I felt confident enough that I could do justice to it. So you can't, I mean, there are writers who can go entirely from the imagination. For me, this was a question of respect, actually. If you write about rural Haryana, you can't make it up because people who live in Rohtak will find you out.
Right.
Should we continue the audio or should we just read questions out? Okay, I think Unmana has a question.
Yeah. You can mute me again, please. She answered my question.
Hi. Hey, Nilanjana. I wanted to ask, I think you said earlier, what I understood you to be saying earlier was that you started the book as maybe literary fiction, and at some point you felt it should be a crime novel. I just wanted to understand at what point of the writing process, and were there any specific books that inspired you that do this kind of thing, like transcend genre in the way you ended up doing?
That's a great question, but I didn't think of it as literary fiction or anything. I just thought of it as a story that I was pursuing. I didn't know myself how I was getting more than a little obsessed with Chand, Rabia, the Yamuna, Pitapur, Bright Dairy, all these places. I just knew that there was something there that I was seeing. There was a vision of a city very different from the very easy South Delhi, slightly over-sheltered South Delhi world in which I live, that I found completely fascinating, and I wanted to write about that. But I'm terrible at figuring out what genre I write in. I've been to this day with my first two books, The Wildings, or children's fiction, or fantasy, or parables. I don't care. I'm terrible about that. I'm very non-classificatory, even when I read as a critic, unless a specific writer wants to be identified as part of a genre. Um, I don't like words, I don't like labels, and I tend to write with a tremendous amount of freedom and then later ask myself what it is. So it took my agent to point out that this was crime fiction. Whereupon I blinked and I said, okay, I didn't really want to go there because most of the crime writers I've read are really tremendous at what they do. And this is going to require a very hard learning curve. And then I sat there and I sweated over the technical side of it. But the books that I was inspired by, I think in a shadow way, yes, I didn't consciously think that I wanted to follow this writer or that writer. But Dennis Nihani, who wrote an incredible book called Mystic River, he was hovering somewhere at the back of my mind. So is Donna Tartt, The Secret History, which is another book that just doesn't care for what label you put on it. It's happy to belong in many houses at the same time. But I think I'm terrible about genre that way. And by the way, I owe you a walk, which we didn't get to do when we were in Delhi. And, when the weather's better, come to that. I promised her a walk and didn't come through on it. But I think, it's not because of a contempt for genre. It's just that I think I'm going to be doing this as a writer for the rest of my career. It's only after I finish a book that I'm going to ask myself what this peculiar beast is. You see? I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes.
Do we have questions from the audience
we do.
here? Yeah, we have quite a few actually, so we can just
lady
pass the
here
mic
has a-
around.
The lady in the black has had.
Yeah, I think the lady here had her hands up first. Yeah. You can just pass.
I just wanted to say that I read the book, thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've read a lot of crime fiction over the years, and you wait for the end, I'm not giving it away, but I thought that the build-up of tension was just beautifully done. And I congratulate you on that.
Oh my God, you've just, one of the things that I was really frightened about is that people would guess who did it because I was very casual about that. So you've just put one of my worst fears to rest. And thank you so much for that.
Came as such a surprise that I was really enchanted with that.
Please adopt me.
Consider yourself a top.
Thank you.
We yeah, I think yeah. Okay, I have lots of hands right now, but yeah, just give it to the lady there. Yeah.
Well, I'm not from Delhi, actually. I'm from the South, and I'm here for only 1.5 years. So when my friend suggested the book, and when she understood that it is based in Delhi, she immediately backed out, saying that a crime based in Delhi is not for her because she used to live in Delhi. So I took up the challenge and started reading. And after a few pages, after the crime was committed, I was so shocked, as he said, I just put down the book for 1 week.
I apologize.
No. I have a granddaughter. That's why I'm just terrified of that. So after some time, I took it up and started reading. And I think that you have really revealed a Delhi to me, which is good in a way, because I don't have time enough to see Yamuna and a lot of other things and get along with their people like that. But you really exposed that Delhi to me. And thank you so much. And I really enjoyed reading that.
Thank you. There was a love letter to Delhi in this. I know cities choose you, and I wish I'd chosen something more glamorous like Paris or Calcutta, where I was born, but then you chose me. And thank you for seeing this.
Hi. You talked earlier about how crime novels usually are about changes in a city or a place. And the like the bit where you go into the flashback was really interesting for me to read. The bit about where Chand walks in the butcher shop, you can see his stubbornness, right? When he's trying to get things cleaned and he just refuses to listen to his boss. So it was really interesting to get that glimpse of his character and then later see how it carries on, when you go back to the present time. But the I wanted to first ask about the research about, that bit of the city, because you talk about how that butcher shop or that area has to be pushed out of the city, then it comes back in and it's
Slaughterhouse, yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then also about Titarpur, where there are bits of dialogue about how it's developing. And, so you have the city that keeps expanding, places that keep going out and coming in, and then villages or towns which keep changing. And I want to ask about the research about the slaughterhouse bit, but also about how you try to show the changes that are happening over
Okay.
time.
Just to explain, there's a chapter in the book that's set on Chand's discovery of the old Ghazipur slaughterhouse, which is where all of the city's meat used to come from. And it's both very shocking to him and also, without romanticizing it, he realizes it's one of those parts of the city where a lot of people come together in a matter of fact way, over again some classic boundaries, whether it's caste, there's a kind of community that develops out there, a free wheeling community, despite everything that's disturbing about slaughter itself. I think that was a place of knives, right? That came from the years when I just had a lot of careers. So I was briefly a food critic, pinch hitting for the Business Standard's actual food critic. And we had two problems. We had absolutely no budget at that point of time to actually go to restaurants. And because the paper was run by Mr. Nyman, who was a very upstanding and correct editor, we weren't allowed to take free meals from restaurants. So this is a bit of a catch-22. So I spent a lot of my time researching food or speaking to, the first organic farmers and stuff. And as a consequence, I also got to know the butchers of the city, who were the old Qurayshis, but also a surprising number of Hindu families, have been part of the trade for a very long time. And a few women butchers whom initially I wanted to write about, but maybe some other book. And I think the lovely thing about writing a book, a novel, that sprawls over several years, these days everyone wants to write everything fast. You want to hit AI and press a button and, have it all zip out in 300 neat printed pages. But then you lose what you have with a 5-year, 6-year, slow burn, which is that you can just reach into different parts of your past or other people's pasts with permission and use that, So Slaughterhouse came out of, to some extent, my walking through it, but it also came out of listening to butchers and people in the trade who worked out there, and just clocking the fact that they had a tremendous affection for this, place of knives, and saying that, okay, I want to find some way to capture that. The other thing you asked about was Titarpur, and that's based on a whole bunch of villages that are near the Aravallis. They're squeezed between the Delhi border and the start of the Aravallis. And some of them have ended up a little frozen in time. And some of them don't really want the city's changes to come in, even though it does. But they are up against the biggest beast of our times, which is development. And I don't mean that all development is bad, certainly not. But, I wouldn't call Black River a climate fiction book per se, but I would say that the environment, the mahal of Delhi does seep into it. And you see the changes over time. Bright Dairy, where Rabia lives, is right next to this enormous garbage mountain that I ended up walking one day and then falling sick for a week afterwards, because I'm a wimp. But out there, they rationalize it because they live next to it by saying there's a fire-breathing jinn under the mountain. And whatever it is, that story makes it a little more like home, right? So Titarpur again, there's no such place, but there is such a place, if you get what I mean. And it was only when I had spent a lot of time in maybe 5 or 6 villages, got to know people, that I felt confident that I could make it out of thin air. And it's not said in the book, Titatpur is very rigidly laid out, one through caste, community, whatever. Umber's a great guy, but as a police officers go. But one of the reasons why he helps Chand out is, I suspect, because Chand was of an acceptable caste in a community close to him. I think it would have been much edgier if it had been a different situation. I hope that helps. Yeah. Is anyone getting left out?
We
Oh, there's-
we also need to get back to Zoom. Should we do Zoom first and then just
How
one
much-
Zoom question and then
How much
it's a bit-
time does everyone have? Okay, we have time.
Okay, so we'll just do one Zoom question and then get back to you. So this is do we ask Karthik to ask his question? It's actually quite an interesting one, I think, which touches on what you
Hi.
were saying earlier. Yeah.
Hi, Nilanjana. Thank you for writing the book. It's been such a pleasure reading it. It is devastating in part, but yes, I did have a lot of fun reading it. My question is that there is a library in the book which says all are welcome. And on the other side, you see that there's a village which is putting up boards to stop people. So for the library, I know it's a very small detail, but did you add that to purposely show how different worlds operate? Thanks.
Well, that's a lovely question, and I've never been asked that before. I think it was completely unconscious. So much of this was based on some of the things that I'd seen. But there are pockets of Delhi where you might not have bookstores, and you might not have access to anything like a cafe or even a dhaba or tea stall where people can hang out. But you'd have a one-room library. And I noticed that in a lot of places, from Kulsumpur to Shaheen Bagh to Jahangirpuri, I noticed that the library almost always had a sign up there saying, "Everybody please come in," or "All are welcome," or "The books are free to read." It's just some little sign of encouragement. And I thought that was rather beautiful. And I've been in Delhi long enough to be not naive about the fact that it's had segregation baked into its community life for many, many decades. I'm not nostalgic about the past out here. But the whole phenomenon of urban villages and places coming up with these boards that say, in our time, Muslims not allowed, in earlier times, it might have been Dalits not allowed, with that hardcore exclusion, open and owned. That in this era was a modern phenomenon. And I think, Black River also allowed me to do a little bit of old-fashioned journalisting, by which I mean, I wanted to record that this time. I think, we've talked about this once. I just felt an urgency to record things, even small things, because we're forgetting so much so fast. We seem to be trapped in this endless rushing news cycle with everything coming to us. And I felt that I was forgetting Delhi the way it was. I also wanted to catch these little moments. I hope these boards go away and never come back. I hope they're burned to the ground, every one of them. But I just wanted to record that, yes, the city had this and that as well. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes, it does.
I had a couple of questions from here, right? Yeah.
Okay, after this, the lady in she's been
Okay, yeah.
and the pink lady.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I loved your book and the characters, and
Thank
you breadcrumbed certain characters. Like you have the woman, the fallen woman who's disappeared. And we don't have that investigation at the same level as Muni. I've also read that this is part of a 3-book series and you will be writing more. So my question is, are we going to see more of Umveer Singh, and are some of the characters from Black River going to appear in the sequels?
Thank you. There are going to be more books for sure. I've almost finished writing one of them. And I want to, I think most of the characters in Black River won't be in the next one. and it's a completely new set of characters. The only way is safe.
Hi. So I have a question, but I'm not going to talk about the ending or anything like that because I've read the book. So I find the way, even though you're talking about Chand's memories and his youth and everything, it's not isolated, because what I like about the book is how everything sort of ties in together very well towards the end. My question is, especially at certain instances in his life, such as his time in the butcher shop, he wasn't sure how he felt about, what was taking place there, the slaughter and everything. Did you already think ahead on certain aspects which would be earlier in the novel, which weave themselves together, or did it kind of just come about automatically somewhere towards the middle? Because I found that very intriguing, because Chand, even towards the end of the book, is still very enigmatic. So I can understand why people would wonder whether there will be a sequel of some sort.
That's a very sharp observation, and you're getting straight to technique, which is something I absolutely love talking about. So the answer is, I went two ways with this book. One is three ways, really. I spent a lot of time trying to understand the characters, trying to really get their worlds, to know things that you need not know, for example, what they were like as children or whatever. Then the second layer was very technical, very clockworky, but it was a very deliberate timeline. And you wanted that to be invisible at the end so that people didn't feel it when they were writing, but you do want readers to feel instinctively that they trust the time, if you get what I mean. The allied to this, and this goes back to the first part of it, is every character had to be allowed to reveal only as much of themselves as they really wanted to. You see? So this was easy with the upfront characters. Ombir is pretty transparent. He's pretty much all there. Chand, on the other hand, he has layers to him, and there's areas where even I cannot walk into his privacy. You see? And the last layer of this, there was the characters, there was the timeline. The last layer was I tore up the two drafts that I'd worked on, threw them out the window, and I rewrote it again as fiction, but as if it was real, as if it was non-fiction. So, there was a lot of layering out there, but I think it finally worked. You can sense when your own books aren't working. You can sense when it's hollow. I don't know whether I'll ever come back to the Black River world again, and maybe in the third book, but maybe with the passage of time. Just that I think most of the characters there have more or less said to me from the, oh God, I sound so annoying. Anyway, most of the characters have indicated that, this is as far, the stories keep going, but this is as far as they might want to go in fiction. And, the next book is set in a completely, it's still Delhi-ish, but it's a very different world. Yeah.
Can
Thank
we
you.
have yeah, and after that, can we just have the mic here?
Yeah. Hi, Nilanjana. It was a pleasure hearing you all this way. Just wanted to know that you're a journalist and you had a peep into the city. So was this book a way of putting what all you had absorbed of the city into the world out there? Or was the research done because you wanted to write the book?
Good question. I think it overflowed at some point. A lot of the research, so to speak, was happening unconsciously as part of the work. But I was going through a slight frustration with journalism itself. This was for a couple of reasons. One is that I wasn't very good at it. You have to be objective as a journalist. And I used to just get very caught up in whatever stories I was covering. I did a story on homelessness and homeless women I don't know, or how 2024 minus 2009 is 15 years ago. And I'm still in touch with many of the women I spoke to out there. And I realized that I was very, very bad at maintaining that distance and that objectivity the journalists are supposed to have. But what I like about being a journalist is that you're not impatient at the fact of research. You will check something 3 or 4 times. You walk into a place like Titapur, and your first reactions don't matter. You're not seeing the place clearly. But after you've spoken to maybe 4 people, you've got 4 different views of the village, and maybe after a year, you will be able to say, okay, this is how it takes, this is how it works, this is the boss man, this is where the mover and shaker is, this is where there's despair, this is where there's a clash between generations, all of that. Again, I think I'm wandering very far from your question, right? But the research part of it, I've never minded that. I think a lot of it was unconscious and happened years before I even started writing Black River. It did. The other part of being a journalist, aside from the fact that I was terrible at being objective, was that I was often very frustrated because you're supposed to write neat, endings with a bow and a message. And so often, particularly with gender, everything that I was covering was a lot messier, or you were looking at something that was part of an ongoing story. And for example, when this was 2009, when we were working on an entire series on violence against women, at that point of time, each individual story seemed like it was feeding into the classic India story of women are under siege out here. And that was not untrue. There was a certain degree of masculine violence just breaking out across the North in particular. But behind that story, there were more layers. And one of those layers was that despite the odds against them, women were breaking through, sometimes with the support of the men in the family, which was a surprise to me. Sometimes it was the women in their family who were much harsher and who were saying that, no, she should just get married and do this. And the second layer was there was a wave of women who were entering the workplace, getting pushed back by this violence or other forms of violence, taking some time off, and 5 years back, 5 years later, they were back in again. And I think, I point to the novel because that allows you to capture those big, slow movements of time in a way that, not to diss journalism, but at least the journalism I was doing, I just got very frustrated with having to write that last paragraph where everything ends happily ever after. It just didn't work for me.
Hi, Nilanjana. I'm from Faridabad. So it was surprising for me to see my city's name there in the book. One thing I would like to compliment you about, like all the people here, they are talking about the daily life, the layering that you showed in the book, but also the way you have captured Haryana villages, the real estate scenario that is going there, and how people are ambient to each other only because of that status quo. How Jolly is related to the village and how he's helping has to majorly do a lot with the real estate work that he's planning on the back side. So that's really nice. Like you have really captured the subconsciousness that is going in the Haryana villages right now.
Thank you so much. And I was lucky just because a lot of people talked to me about this. But one thing I'm sad about, when you said that you were surprised to see Faridabad in a novel, I look at that and I think Delhi is this enormous city. It's just this megalopolis that has moved into Haryana on one side, UP on the other side, will reach Bombay someday. I'm sure of it. And I really believe that our stories have to start coming out of Faridabad and Ghaziabad. The Delhi story has to come out of West Patel Nagar and all of that. It can't just be us. So out here, I see my role as a proxy and maybe a very poor proxy. And I hope in another generation, people will wipe writers like me off the map because they will be writing their own stories without an interpreter.
No, not at all, poor
But,
proxy, not at all. I mean,
no, thank
the
you.
way you
But,
have covered Haryana villages, no, and the quirks about the policemen, like just like Jay sir mentioned that Ombir or Bhim Singh, they were not working out of any moral ethics. They have this behavior quirks, their own likes and dislikes, by which they end up taking a case seriously or rejecting a case or outright. So that is something that an outsider cannot pick until and unless they have experienced it themselves.
I'm so
that's
glad you
really
think
nice.
that. Thanks.
I just have one question. So you have experienced the crime and the justice that's happening in Haryana villages. So what future do you think? Like you have created that bigger picture as an author, the God angle view where you can see the pattern, how the system works. So what future do you think lies ahead? Like for Delhi, for a metropolitan city, it's obvious that few things that we can fix and the system can be brought into order. But that's not a statement you can put out for places like Haryana or UP. So after writing this book and all the experiences you have had, what future do you think the justice system here in generally has? Anything that you.
Haryana, I'm not that unoptimistic about. There's problems, and you know what they are. There's deeply embedded structural problems. There's a huge nexus between corporators, developers, politicians, and that is messing things up. UP, which is another state I know well to some extent, but it's too vast for me to be able to claim that I know. I worry that it will never pull out of a certain comfort with extreme violence and extreme brutality, often sanctioned by whoever's in charge of the state at that time. Haryana doesn't quite have that yet. The future, I don't know. I think your state is actually changing more rapidly than most of us realize. But it, it depends. The changes that I see right now under the surface, a lot of them are coming from the women, but also from the men in this generation and from the cops, which are not quite as monocolored as we think that they are. There seems to be a time of a lot of introspection, and some of it will just remain very firmly conservative, let's put it that way, But within that, there's room for a lot of movement. So I think you're going to see change, but slow change. I don't think you'll see as much of a degradation in policing and justice as you do elsewhere. It doesn't work, the justice system, it doesn't work well, but it's not yet a point of despair, if you see what I mean. There's still, every now and then, there's the surprising possibility that justice hoga unexpectedly, on the third Wednesday of the night of the full moon.
I think there's a question from Prashant. Is your audio on?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Nilanjana, first of all, congratulations on a very good book. I was just curious about this part where Rabia is talking to Chan on phone, and that was so beautifully crafted. I really liked it. So considering that, I thought wasn't it like a bit of a kind of downward trajectory where to reveal the obvious thing in their past, the one time they had gotten together, especially considering that towards the end, again, you have left it open ended. But overall, it was a really nice book.
Spoiler. The first spoiler question of the evening, but thanks anyway. It was a good one. So I think you're asking whether I could have been more reticent about that, and the answer is I had a choice between being delicate and leaving it all in beautiful pastels. The scene he's talking about is a scene where Chand is still shattered by grief. He doesn't really want to talk, but he reaches out to this old friend of his, and she puts on her radio with a tune to some old nostalgic Hindi film station, the 50s, 60s, 70s. You've got maybe Mohammed Rafi, you've got Naushad Ali, all of that playing. And they just spend the evening together in that very quiet, very wordless way. But if I spoke more about their lives or spoke about, something that was after all a very small part of their relationship, even though both of them remember it, I think I spoke only as much as they wanted me to speak. And a lot of my editors were rooting for Chand and Rabia to get together. But the key to that comes from Rabia. She spent a lot of time on her own. She may not want to give up that space, not even for somebody she loves after all these years. And I just felt that rather than forcing a full-on romance on her, I could leave it to her and Chand to decide for themselves how this was going to work out. Also, the man travels a lot here. Anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Month. Hi.
So first of all, fingers crossed for that dagger thing that's happening in July.
No chance.
Congratulations.
But it was nice to meet you.
I stopped reading the book because of work in December. And so I'm about 50 pages in. And I picked up on something that I noticed in the wildlings as well, which is that the way your really young character, Munia here, Mara there, interact with nature. And I was wondering if you'd talk about that.
I hadn't seen that. So I think that's one of the few bits where maybe the author's own tastes come into play a little bit. You know, I think so. A lot of us here just have a love of the earth itself, and I seem to hand that love to one of my characters in any of these books. But with Munya also, it came out of even when I was out on some of the most depressing or dark stories. So often when you were speaking to the women, the kids were just such a delight because they hadn't yet got to the stage where they were being told, stay indoors, do this, do that. And, the comfort with the earth, with running around in the fields, with climbing trees and all of that, and, just being so loose and free and easy with themselves and loving what was around them. I don't think I consciously said to myself that I want to capture that, but it's so much part of, village or even city life, that unself-conscious, I'm here, I'm going to explore. And the one thing that I did probably slightly self-consciously give Mumia is that I used to run away a lot from the house in the afternoons, escaping people's attention and get into the neighbor's back garden and climb trees. And I wanted her to have that fun too. It was a hard murder to write,
Thanks, Nilanjana, for sharing so many. I think we don't have time now. No? For more. Do we have one more? There was time for just one more. Quick question and quick answer.
Well, one, I wanted to know when you name your characters, do you just like pick a very typical name that would work for that character in that milieu, or do you have fun with it? And what is that? Something I want to know of every writer. How do they choose their names? And the other thing is, so you've spoken in almost all the questions about not feeling like you can overstep when you're telling, with your position and the kind of story you're telling. And where do you then, how do you navigate that, like in terms of telling a story, not wanting to appropriate? What are the lines you kind of draw there?
Oh, that's where we get into messy first draft territory. I think the reason that the book took a long time is because I was mulling over these questions of privilege. I genuinely believe that writers should be free to write whatever they want, but the attitude that you walk in with can be respectful. It can be curious but slightly aggressive, or curious and benign. It can be condescending and, let me write about the poor people because they can't write for themselves. You're sending me often to a side rant. I have never met anyone in this country who is truly voiceless. They just don't have a platform. There's a big difference between being platformless and being voiceless. You can learn acquisitively and, extractively, mining that territory. But I think if you go and just say, we come from very different places, but human to human, there's something I can relate to. Then that's where the starting point comes from me, and then you're in a learning curve. I don't think you can write a character until you pay respect to their lives and their particularness. So I totally failed with Rabia, for example, in the first draft. I was being so respectful, comes from a totally different world, Muslim woman. I need to be careful about all that I made her very pious and she hated it. She was just like very good, not pious, I made her a saint. And at some point, she just walked in when I was sitting there at the study and she was like, can you just throw this out? This is not working. Let me tell you about me. And that was that. Names, most of them name themselves. I don't quite know how to explain this, but they don't say I'm Chand or whatever. but they kind of brush past you in your imagination and you realize, oh, that's Chand. You see, that happened with Chand, Rabia, Khalid, Omir, and Bhimsen. And then Bacha Mia sulked at me because I had called him Magan Mia. And he was suddenly being very uncooperative in a biryani scene. And I don't know what happened to you? And then he said very loudly inside my head, Bacha Mia Didi. That's it. And he was very clear about who. So, you don't know what this is. Is this a projection of your own imagination? Or are your characters at some level, I think characters occupy the same space that friends you haven't seen for a long time who don't live in the same city do. They're out of your physical zone, but they actually are as alive as somebody you know that well from memory. So the keynote about the appropriation question, I do think we have to be careful about that. But, and at the same time, I want to keep that door as wide open as possible both ways. It can't be a one-way thing, which is where a lot of the hassle comes from. But I think there's a difference between going in and saying, let me mind these lives that are so colorful, and saying, can I do this with some humility? That's the first thing that comes in, admitting that you don't know everything. And the second is individuality. Child, who everybody loves because he's got a, feeling to him, he takes decisions that are tricky, that are morally very dubious. And I want to just let him be on that front. Again, no spoilers. He's giving me that look that says no spoilers. And so that's it. You have to let them be who they are. And that takes years. But it's worth it, I hope. Okay. Thanks so much. I think we are well out of time.
Thanks so much for these really entertaining insights into your process and your relationship with the characters and the settings. I think copies of the book are here, right? So if any of you want to get them signed or
and keep my cats in kibble. Yeah. Jai, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for the hospitality.
Thank you very much for being here, and thank you, audience, and thank you, Zoom participants. I don't think that we could have asked for a better start to our new book club. So thank you, Himali is not here, but thank you, Himali, and thank you, Suitable Agency. And word had reached me, though I met you for the first time today, but I think friends of mine who were at the Jaipur Literature Festival said, oh, Nilanjana, she speaks wonderfully. So I said, okay, here's a person who writes wonderfully. And obviously you spin such a good tale, even in person, that I think we could have carried on forever. And the combination of Jay and you was excellent because obviously you know each other so well that when you need to check a date, you look at him, except it's your date and you're checking with him. So that's a lovely, we couldn't have asked for a better duo for our first event. So thank you, everybody. And Shivendra, can I ask you to come up here so that we can announce our next month's book? Our next meeting is going to be on the last Saturday of next month, which is Saturday 29th. Nope, you will come here as ASA and announce your book and author.
So after this fascinating start, we have another fascinating session coming up on 29th of June, Saturday. We'll have Mrinal Pandey here discussing the novel Suitably. So save the date. And of course, we are all registered members, so we'll be sending out the details as well. But this is a heads up for all of you who have come today and joined online. But thank you, Nilanjana. Thanks so much. That was great. Thank you.